Hello everybody, welcome back. It's a very cold and windy day here in the Atlanta, Georgia area where I live, which is somewhat unusual. It's below freezing even though it's the middle of the day, so it's a little unusual. Anyway, if you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a certified yoga teacher, kirtan artist, ordained minister, amongst other things. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about where is the lesson, or what is the lesson. I have personally found anytime that I am suffering, there is a lesson to be learned. Before I get into that, I do want to thank my patrons on Patreon. They make these talks possible by making a monthly contribution. Some of you are contributing quite a bit. Some people contribute as little as $1, but it really is those people who allow me the time and resources to make these talks public and free of charge. So I hope you will thank them if you're getting something from these talks. If you'd like to become a part of that community, go ahead and check the links below. You can also make a one-time donation via PayPal or Venmo, but it's really the patrons who allow me to approach this as part of my job. All right, so where's the lesson? What is the lesson? I've been talking quite a bit about the dark night recently because that's something that I personally have been going through. And it's also something that many students who I speak to are also going through. So it's something I think is really relevant and worth talking about. And this aspect of it is, I think, really, really important, because otherwise we experience seemingly needless suffering. So I'll just say, in my experience, needless suffering doesn't exist. It's not to say that life can't be challenging or painful. That's not what I'm saying. Life is challenging. Life is painful. When I'm talking about suffering, I'm really talking about kind of our psychological suffering. So just because something quote unquote bad happens to me doesn't mean I need to suffer. So I lost my father during the pandemic. I was sad, but I didn't suffer. Okay, so have to draw a distinction between sadness or pain, discomfort, challenges, difficulty, and suffering. So when I'm talking about suffering, I'm really talking about a psychological condition. This could also be called hell. Okay, hell on earth, hell, however you want to think about it, suffering. So in my experience, there's no such thing as needless suffering. And the reason for this is, if we are suffering, almost by definition, that means that there is something we're not seeing, something we haven't learned, and there's something that we need to learn. Okay? Byron Katie, who's a spiritual teacher who I really admire and like and recommend if you haven't checked out any of her resources, she says, anytime I'm suffering, I know I'm believing a thought that is not ultimately true. So again, could be relatively true, but ultimately the assumption, the thought, the fear, it ultimately isn't true. So what this means is, if we are suffering, there is something that we are not seeing. There's a lesson, something that we can let go of. And I will say it's usually a letting go of something. Letting go of a belief, letting go of an idea, letting go of an attachment, letting go of a relationship or something like this. And the reason for this is, in my experience, we suffer because we're holding on to something or resisting something. Our default, if you will, the default for us is peace and bliss. Sat Chit Ananda, truth, consciousness, bliss. This is our true nature. This is what awareness defaults to. And so when we are not experiencing that, we are experiencing some kind of delusion or confusion or resistance to the flow of life and experience. And so if we are suffering, that means in some way we are resisting, we are believing something that's not true. And this is in opposition to how many people approach or think about spirituality, which is that blissful states, union with God, experiencing our true nature needs to be earned. This is not at all my experience. My experience is that that is actually our true nature, that's our default nature. And if we have to earn anything, it's that we have to see where we're holding on, where we're resisting, and then we need to let go of that, which may take work. And this is where the confusion can come in for many people, because they may have to do weeks, months, years, decades of spiritual practices in order to feel that they can let go safely. But the truth is, if they could just in that moment see what they were holding on to and why, and let go of it, the default for us as part of the whole, which is it transcends spiritual, not spiritual in a sense, but is divine, if you will. The default is this peaceful, blissful union. And so it's only to the degree, again, that we're the only ones powerful enough to do it. So I just need to be clear about that. You might feel like you're being put upon, that someone else is cutting you off or keeping you from experiencing this, but you're really the only one that can do it. You're the only one powerful enough to do it to yourself. And again, I understand the illusion and the delusion that there are others who are causing me to experience this, but I assure you that is a delusion, that is confusion on our part. So it can be very powerful when we are suffering to pause and take some time to ask the question, where is or what is the lesson? Because otherwise we can seem to just suffer for no apparent reason. And again, in my experience, this just doesn't happen. We are the only ones powerful enough to, again, cut ourselves off. Now, again, what I'm trying to draw the distinction here for you is if you have gone through an awakening experience and you had a peek in the tent or a preview of kind of the final state of enlightenment, and then that goes away, the temptation, I think, for many people is to think, oh, well, I'm doing something wrong, or I lost it, or I need to work harder. And yes, there might be some work involved, but it's not because you don't deserve that peace and bliss. The peace and bliss we experience with awakening is unearned. It's grace. It's not because you were a good little boy or girl, or you were a spiritual little boy or girl, or anything like that, which is so often where we tend to go. And so many people in spirituality fall into that trap. Again, in my experience and from what I've studied, we are perfect always. We were created perfect, and that has never changed. And again, if you want to dive into that a little more, check out A Course in Miracles. So any idea that I am less than perfect, or any idea that I am somehow an awful sinner who needs to earn redemption into God's grace, that is part of the confusion that causes the suffering. So with this being the backdrop, we don't need to do practices to earn God's love or God's grace or to experience our true nature. All we have to do is let go of the ways in which we're resisting it. And again, this is what spiritual practice can help us with. And we do want to be very honest with ourselves. So, if I am feeling cut off or separated or whatever it is, then it very well may be the case that doing spiritual practices or studying with a teacher or studying scripture will help me work through my own resistances or blocks. But again, we want to be very careful about not confusing removing blocks with earning something. So again, so often in spirituality, this idea of earning something comes up, that I need to earn God's grace or God's love, or I have to earn realizing my true nature. And again, I think a much healthier and effective way of thinking about it is you're not earning anything. It's not about deserving. You deserve it. You deserve love. You deserve peace. You deserve the bliss of your true nature. So why are you not experiencing it? Because you have cut yourself off, again, with confusion, by believing something that doesn't align with the truth of your nature. And belief is very powerful. Thoughts are powerful. Ideas are powerful. So if you think that these things cannot cut us off, you are absolutely mistaken. They absolutely can and do. And this is, I think, the main cause of our suffering, is an incorrect belief or idea about ourselves, about reality, about others, whatever it might be. So practices, teachers, scriptures, anything that helps us identify or begin to open up and allow that grace back in, these are helpful. But this is the kind of the gist of today's talk, which is, what is or where is the lesson? This is a very, I think, intelligent and useful question for us to ask anytime that we're suffering, because again, we are suffering because of something we are doing. It's not to say that there aren't seemingly other actors or a world out there or things that are happening, but again, those don't cause suffering. Suffering comes from our own, and again, I'm talking about psychological suffering, not physical pain or something like that. Psychological suffering comes from our beliefs or ideas about how things should be or shouldn't be or something like this, and we cause ourselves, as a result, suffering. We cut ourselves off. We don't need to earn that blissful, loving experience of feeling connected. That is our birthright. So this is something that I have been doing quite a bit as of late, because I have been suffering, which is new for me. It's been a very long time where I didn't experience much suffering. I felt very much connected with the flow of life, and I just would wake up with so much gratitude for this life and for the day ahead of me. And it's not like I have an amazing life or anything, an exceptional life. I live a fairly modest life. I have a little car. I have a little apartment. I work here locally. It's not like I have global influence. There are many things that I do without. There are a few things that I do indulge in, but there's nothing really exceptional about my physical life. Most of my students live a much physically more luxurious and wealthy life than me. And yet, very often, if we were to talk and discuss, they have quite a bit more suffering in their lives. And so again, this goes back to the point that it's not really physical stuff. That's not what any of this is about. Spirituality is about finding peace and joy inside of ourselves, irrespective of outward circumstances. So, again, for a very long time, years and years and years, well over a decade, I was experiencing this immense peace and joy and bliss and satisfaction, contentment with my rather humble life. And within, let's say, the last year or so, about a year, and maybe it started somewhat before then, but basically I have felt much more cut off from that. There's been a lot of suffering. And so this is a question that I have been exploring in depth in myself and in my own life, my own practices. How am I getting in my own way? How am I cutting myself off? What belief or idea do I have that is causing this suffering? And how can I identify it? And how can I let it go? And what practices support me in that work? So for me personally, one of the practices I have found the most solace in is chanting. So doing kirtan, especially with others, the community that creates has been very, very meaningful and important to me. But even sitting in my own room and chanting at my lowest points during this dark night that I've been going through, at my lowest points, it was chanting and singing the mantras that I felt really lifted me up, and you could say in a sense saved me. It was a very dark space that I felt I was in. And so these mantras, these chants that I've learned and are a part of my life now, part of my practice, those more than anything made me feel better. And so again, this is an example of what I'm talking about. Do I need to chant and or worship or do something in order to feel connected on a normal basis? I don't think so. Are those bad things to do on a normal basis? No, absolutely not. They are good for us. Most spiritual practices are. So doing asana regularly, pranayams, prayer, mantra, all of these things are going to be good for us, generally speaking. But again, if we think we need to earn a feeling of connection, earn our place in heaven or nirvana, earn God's grace or love, I think this is a mistake. This is confusion, and this can keep us in a dark night or black night situation longer. You know, dark night of the soul, which is what I'm referring to. So, asking this question, and this is what I really wanted to share with you today, what is the lesson? Where is the lesson? Where is the confusion? This can be extremely, extremely helpful. And at least for me in this current circumstance, it hasn't been a simple one and done answer. So I would love to have this talk with you and be like, yeah, I sat down and meditated. I asked what's the lesson, and then an intuition came and it lifted, and that was it. And there have been moments like that. Interestingly, I have had sort of insights and things come up, and the darkness seems to lift, but then it seems to come back. I will say this, that every time it comes back, it doesn't come back with as much force. So I feel much, much, much better today than I did, say, 3 or 6 months ago. However, I'm leery to say, oh, I'm completely out of this dark night of the soul, because again, it seems like every time I think I've completely turned the corner, I will have another sort of moment of darkness that comes over, and that, again, I feel like I need to ask this question, okay, you know, what is the lesson? What do I need to see? What do I need to learn? As I've shared in a previous talk, my experience is that when we learn the lesson, when we expand into that greater understanding of what we are in the nature of reality, and I think that's really what it comes down to for us, is we will experience this, our dark night, in one form or another until that confusion has lifted, and then we might not experience anything like that, any kind of suffering, for long periods of time or maybe ever. But we might find we go a long time without experiencing suffering, and then there's another lesson to be learned. More confusion, however you want to think about it. Really, the way I'm laying things out is just so that we can understand what I'm talking about. It's not like I'm saying, oh, this is the way that it is, or the only way of viewing or understanding these things. So anyway, I hope that this is helpful to you. Like I said, I've spoken with many people at this point, and it seems like many people are going through this dark night of the soul right now. Many people who have woken up, who have had very powerful spiritual experiences, and who have lived in the light of their own true nature, and you could say God's love, but yet are now experiencing a kind of a darkness, almost like a dark blanket has been pulled over you, and you're trying to find your way out of this blanket. So Surrender is something I've spoken quite a bit about in the past. Very, very powerful. Allowing that darkness, if you will, in. Inviting it in, the awareness of it, the feelings that come with it. Very powerful. But another element is this one I'm talking about today, which is, where's the lesson? What do I need to learn? What do I need to see? And in my experience, the lesson, it usually isn't something like, oh, I need to call my mother more often, or I need to stop eating so many donuts, or it's usually not something like that, like an action-oriented. I don't want to say that it can't be, because I honestly don't know, that maybe it could show up that way for somebody. But in my experience, it's more universal, and it's a deeper seeing about, again, how our beliefs, our judgments, our way of looking at ourselves, at the world, at others, how that is, again, somehow stopping that, or constricting the natural flow of love that wants to move through us. And that's what I think, in my experience, and to the best of my knowledge, this is what suffering is. This is how we create it. There's just this flow of never-ending love that we experience as very blissful, and we are the only ones powerful enough to choke that off. Not completely, but we can kind of try. And when we're trying and choking that off, that's when we experience what I would call, again, psychological suffering. So surrendering and letting go and allowing, again, that very often helps with that release. But then again, also doing some inquiry, and that's really what I'm talking about here today, inquiry. Asking the question, what is the lesson in this? Where is the lesson? What am I not seeing? What could I see that I am not seeing in this situation? So I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions for me, or you'd like to work with me personally, please reach out, and I'd love to hear your experience. Is this something that you have had experience with? Please leave that in the comments below. I always love hearing from you. Until next time, everyone, namaste, and have a beautiful, beautiful day.